tenure as our department's leader and years of service with the Sayreville Police Department. Now, Chief Scudney succeeded in his position because he possessed those traits that were essential to be a progressive and innovative manager. During his long career, the chief witnessed many changes that took place within the borough of Sayreville, the police department, and law enforcement in general. I have to tell you what did not change, however, over all those years was Eddie's desire to maintain, and I'll call it the personal touch. And that's the personal touch of police work. And I think it's safe to say, and Eddie backed me up on this, that he felt the most successful police officer was the one that simply took the time to listen and show compassion to those he encountered. Is that correct, Ed? Now, the chief's style was certainly self-deprecating and low-key. He chose to lead by example, not by headlines. I think Eddie would have liked his role as the chief of police as being kind of an equal partner in a relationship of trust between the officers of our department and the residents of our community. He used the position of chief of police as a mechanism to enhance the services that we in law enforcement provide to our community. Now, a little bit about Eddie. He grew up in the older section of Sayreville, which we all affectionately call Tangletown. He attended St. Stan's Grammar School, graduated from Sayreville High, and then entered the military. Eddie served in the Army, and he was stationed in the center of action, the state of Alaska. Yes, the state of Alaska. Now, after completing his service to our country, Eddie returned to Sayreville, got a job working at the DuPont photo plant, married his sweetheart, Donna. Woo! And they had two wonderful children, Valerie and Matthew. Applause, please. Now, the chief started his career with the Sayreville Police Department in 1974 and spent 36 years helping our community. During that time, Eddie served as a patrolman, a detective in the Juvenile Bureau, detective in Narcotics Division. As supervisor, Eddie worked in the administrative, detective, and patrol divisions. And before his appointment as chief, Eddie served as captain of the detective division. And finally, the last 3 years, as chief of police. Now, his management style, I'd have to say that Eddie seemed to be most comfortable when he was conducting roundtable meetings. And that was with different members of the police department, really anybody he could kind of pull off in the hallway a little bit. And as was his way, the chief would always be deferential to another's opinion. He took the time to listen and weighed his decisions carefully and deliberately, and took a long, long time. Because for those of you that know Eddie, there were always many, many meetings, and they never, ever seemed to end. As for his stature as chief, Eddie never asked for, nor did he place himself on the pedestal. Well, to begin with, Eddie was very conscientious about spending money. I'll be nice and simply say that the chief was frugal. So purchasing a pedestal from which to stand upon would simply not have been in the budget for Eddie. But all kidding aside, Eddie was very simply comfortable with himself. He wanted only to be recognized as a local kid from the Tangletown section of Sayreville who was able to fulfill his dream, and that was to be a cop in the borough of Sayreville. And you know what, Ed? Mission accomplished on that. Very good job. Now, I could tell countless stories about Eddie, because there are countless stories about Eddie, most of which center around his ability to be tight with a buck and his insistence on fixing things rather than replacing them. Let's just say that there's never been an appliance, never been a radio, never been an electronic device or a car that Eddie wouldn't have scoured the owner's manual, reviewed the schematics, and set out to fix it in an effort to save the cost of its replacement. Even today, Eddie would proudly discuss how his most pride and joy was repainting his wife's refrigerator rather than replacing it. Or we could talk about how we had to shut off all the lights at headquarters at a certain hour, the atomic clocks for each office that were supposed to never have to be reset, but they never quite worked, the batteries that we recycled, the many chairs that were taped, glued, fixed, rather than being replaced, and the time Eddie personally counted, yes he did, personally counted every traffic light in town to make sure that the electric bill was accurate. And if I had the time, I could go on telling similar stories, all of which are equally funny, and all of which are simply part of Eddie's charm. But it's not the stories that are the essence of the man. Partly that's because Eddie's self-deprecating enough to tell these stories himself, and partly because they don't define him. In our eyes, Eddie is simply an honorable, down-to-earth, nice person who's strong principles, who cares strongly for what is right and cares strongly for others. All in all, Chief Scuddy has had an exceptional career, and we are very proud to have had the opportunity to serve under his stewardship. At this time, I would like to have our PBA present to Chief Edward Scuddy his state PBA Silver Card for his life and law enforcement accomplishments. Hey. Okay. Our last retiree this evening is Captain Bruce Marcinzik. I would ask Bruce to come up. Captain Bruce Marcinzik has served the borough of Sayreville for over 30 years, and this is quite an accomplishment, and we'd like to congratulate him for his unwavering dedication to the residents of Sayreville and to his role as a law enforcement officer. You know, as many as you know, Bruce is a local boy who grew up with his family in the working section of Sayreville, still lives here today. He attended Jesse Slover School and is a graduate of the Sayreville High School. After his graduation, Bruce served in the U.S. Navy as well as the Naval Reserve. Now, Bruce frequently talks about his time in the Navy, and he speaks very highly. He's very proud to serve his country. But it's clear that life on the high seas just wasn't the ideal career for a guy who walked a mile in someone else's shoes, or Bruce, at least when he had to wear your bumpy shoes.